And we're live. I clicked the button and somehow I am unprepared for going live. Whatever. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being in chat. This is likely going to be, I think, quicker than you think. So Jax and I completely agree on safety tools. They're bad. We'll see you all later.
Yeah, super fast. So we're done.
Um,
That was it. Thank you all for coming so much. It means the world.
so just kidding, of course. So this conversation kind of started between you and, well, first let's start where we said we were going to start. Jax and I are both coming at this from different perspectives. We both have different takes on safety tools. We are not, we're not going to be argumentative, and we are very okay with one another. I've known you for like, I don't know, man, 15 or 20 years, something like that.
Yeah, I
We've
think
had
so.
a wide variety of different discussions. We've agreed and disagreed on a wide variety of different topics. So this isn't, it's not going to, this is not a blood sport, right? This is not going to be a slobber knocker. This is just a conversation, but hopefully an interesting one coming at it from two different angles.
For sure. And like, I think as I was saying right before we went live, I know I have a tendency to get very passionate, particularly about stuff like this, which I really care about. And I think that could come across like I'm really mad or just, and it's not, I'm just passionate. So just like for the record, for the chat, I feel super respected by Bacon. I think it goes both ways. I would hope so.
Yes.
And it's super cool for us to disagree on stuff. I think we both seem to like to have full understandings of other perspectives, even when we disagree with them. I think that's
and of our own perspectives. I like to.
Yeah.
That's kind of why I go through the exercise of writing it down and putting it in a video, because I want to be able to express exactly what my opinion is. So I think that we're similar in that regard for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
So to not just completely jump in both-footed into the deep end, I think that starting off with a point that we agree on is it'll tone set, and it's also, I think, going to be demonstrative of how we're just coming at these from different perspectives. Like I said the other day, we're spitting into the same ravine, we're just on different cliffs, right?
The most disgusting analogy, but it is accurate.
Sorry about that.
It's so accurate.
So regarding this idea that safety tools are actually mislabeled, and they are more accurately called conversation tools, that's not correct. And you and I both agree on that, right? Now, I don't think they're conversation tools, because I'm going to say that they're designed to stop conversations. They're not designed to start conversations. They're not designed to aid conversations that have already begun. They are literally designed to just cut it off without any further effort toward resolution. That's where I stand. You would say that they're not conversation tools because that stop is necessary, because it is for safety. It is definitely a safety tool. So that's the angle that you're hitting it at. So both of us agree, not conversation tools at all.
Yeah.
But different perspectives.
And to be fair to you, I do agree that they can not always cause a stop, right? I don't agree that that's always the case, but I do think I think that is like pretty valid, right? Like to be like, no, this shuts stuff down, because that is part of their intended usage in a way. So I do agree with you on that.
Well, there we go. There's the agreement. All right. Good night, everyone. We'll see. I'm kidding. I won't do that joke again. So from here, because and maybe I am too tired. Maybe, like Brian says, I stayed up too late eating milk and cookies.
It's not a bad thing.
It's funny because he and I had a conversation yesterday, and afterwards there were a couple of Facebook follow-ups after I already said I was going to bed, and he's like, "What are you doing? Eating milk and cookies?" But I can't remember exactly how we decided we wanted to break this down. I know that you wanted to be granular and get into the details.
Yeah.
Would it be? Do you want me to step back and have you just because my opinion's already out there, right? I already.
Yeah. So yeah,
Okay.
let's take it, I guess, like step by step. Um, so when we're talking about safety tools, we're talking about a number of different things that may or may not be in usage at a table, right? I think first and foremost, it's important to say that it, you do not have to use these things, right? That's a huge choice that your table has. And if a table's using them and you don't want to participate in them, you have the choice to leave that table. Totally cool with that. Um, but I think it's good to like understand what these tools are and why someone might want to use them. Because what I feel personally, what I feel like is happening is that the tools themselves are being dismissed out of hand, um, and maybe not understood as to like the importance of why they are useful for not maybe everybody, but for certain people definitely, and they could potentially be useful for everybody. Just because they're not for an individual doesn't mean they don't have the potential to be. So I'd like to start there. So the main one is lines and veils, I guess, to start with, which would happen in session 0.
And to just provide a little bit of context, and this is part of the note taking that I did. So, lines and veils are attributed to Ron Edwards in 2003, and it was first introduced in his game called Sex and Sorcery, which was a supplement for his other game, Sorcerer. Lines are hard boundaries, which are topics that will not appear in the game, and veils are soft limits, which is content that can exist but will be faded into the background or sort of handled off screen. Um, so that's what a line that's what lines and veils are, and that's as far as I'm aware, the earliest sort of say it's the earliest. If we're going to call things safety tools, that's the earliest example of one. But I
Yeah.
actually might not, depending on how it's implemented, don't agree that it's an actual safety tool. But go ahead.
Right. So it's sort of at the beginning of getting into a game, session 0, you players would gather with the GM and sort of discuss if there were any topics that they were uncomfortable with having in at all, if there's some that they're okay with exploring, but maybe would be more hesitant about. Those are lines and veils, right? Uh, it could be contextual, right? I'm okay with such and such topic as long as it doesn't do this. That's really problematic for me. I really can't handle it. That's an agreement among all of the players to avoid those topics.
Okay.
So that's number one. Number one safety tool.
Well, I would just say that, and pardon me, my attention was split a little bit because I was addressing some things in chat, but I would say that as far as lines and veils go, I think that it's really just a matter of having a conversation with the individuals at the table, right? So a lot of people like to take the idea of a standard, I'll call it a compassionate conversation beforehand, and turn that toward the idea of a safety tool. So I don't necessarily think that is correctly labeled a safety tool. I know that in my video I kind of lean on it, and that's because in certain cases, in certain ways that this particular mechanism can be implemented, it can be a safety tool. So I think that we can probably leave it on the list of safety tools. But generally speaking, as it was first conceived, is really just a conversation before the game starts, which is supposed to happen anyway.
It is. And here's why I think it is a safety tool. And this largely comes into, this is about, ultimately, any kind of thing like this is about protecting vulnerable people, right? That's what we're talking about.
Say that again.
A safety tool like this is for protecting someone who is vulnerable in some way, right?
I don't know if I agree with that, but I'm happy to grant that as your perspective.
Yeah, that's my
That's really
perspective.
cool.
This is about
Mhm.
protecting vulnerabilities. And one of the reasons I think having it formalized is good is because if you are from a subset of society which is maybe disadvantaged in some way, That could be a number of different things. That could be socioeconomic, that could be gender, that could be race, it could be sexual, it could be a number of things, right? And you are maybe the only person who is disadvantaged at the table or so disadvantaged. And you don't have something formalized, and you've stated this is something that I'm uncomfortable with. If not having a record of it can be problematic. Having a record, having an agreement that's solidified, that so that if that line is then crossed later in the game, you can say, no, hang on, we agreed at the very beginning of this, we're not doing that. Right?
I'm perfectly fine with that behavior. Like it's like putting no cell phones during play in a social contract, right? Someone pulls out a
Yeah.
cell phone during play, said, "Hey, dude, we talked about this. Please put your cell phone away or step away from the table or whatever because God forbid you don't want to keep someone from addressing a family emergency, but at the same time, it's like not at the table." So that's fine. That is totally fine. That's part of the social contract. I don't have any issues with outlining topics or even behaviors that you don't want to come up at the table. But again, I don't qualify that as a safety tool. It's trust and conversation. It's you're defining the type of experience that you want to have at the table before it begins, which is in my view standard. Or rather, not standard, but it should take a high priority.
It should, for sure. It should. But people
Now,
don't always prioritize that for other people.
well, I also don't think that. So, well, you continue. Go ahead, continue. I don't. I'm not.
That's fine.
I don't
No,
want
no,
to.
like, but the underlying aspect of, and the reason that I haven't read the game, but the reason I imagine that this will have been developed for that particular game is because it was dealing with sex and consent.
Well, sure, but I'm not familiar with that game enough to be able to say one way or
I
the other.
can't, yeah, me neither.
I
That's
would
my
be,
assumption based on the title.
yeah. I don't want to speak directly to that. Um, and so I don't really even know if I have much more to say specifically about lines and veils because it's really, again, in my view, it's not really a safety tool. It's really just a conversation. It's part of the social contract or session zero, whatever you want to call it. And I don't think those things are necessarily safety tools, nor should they really be referred to as safety tools because, as I said in my video, when you take something like discussion or the social expectation of personal autonomy and you give them a name and you say, well, that's an open door policy or that's lines and veils, then you're essentially attempting to, I'm not saying this of you, but you're attempting to backdoor the idea that, oh, you've used safety tools the entire time, we're just now identifying them, or it wasn't called a safety tool. And I don't subscribe to that at all. I think that conversations are conversations, and I think that we don't need to call them something else, right? It is a conscientious, compassionate conversation that you're trying to have with your players. And if someone who you want to play at the table at maybe needs special dispensation, you have that consideration, you have that conversation, and then whatever you decide on, implement it from there. But it is genuinely a conversation.
This is the weirdest thing because we don't disagree, but I do disagree. It's the weirdest. It's very strange. So I do agree that it's a conversation. I think where I disagree is that, like, I think the formalization of it is a safety tool for people. In so much, even in so much as it is still a conversation by naming it and quantifying it, right? The person has something to fall back on. And if you are someone who, for instance, if you are someone who has needs around consent and feeling control over that, there is great power in knowing, okay, actually this has been agreed, and I can fall back on that, and that is a strength that I can stand on, and that will not be invalidated. That is huge.
I hear what you're saying, but I don't. So this is going to rely largely on what my definition of safety tool is.
Okay.
And I define a safety tool as there is a mechanical, there's a mechanism behind it, right? There's a mechanical implementation in the game, be it a card or I guess it's usually cards, right? There's the X card. There's the what's the other one called? Script change.
And
The script change
yeah,
cards with rewind, fast forward, and pause. Like it's usually some sort of there is a mechanic that is implemented, overlaid over top of the game. That to me is what I'm defining as a safety tool. And the reason that I do it that way is because I am just completely unwilling to call a conversation or personal autonomy by a different name because I
so
don't think it's
those,
necessary.
yeah, sorry, I interrupted you.
No, you're good. Go ahead.
So those are hooked into this, right? And so because this is formalized, that is part of where an X card can come up, right? So I was rereading in preparation for this. I was rereading, like for instance, the latest DMG, um, and so should someone cross a line, and you could throw an X in that instance, right? So there's the mechanical element of that because it's been formalized.
Well, because it's been
It will have been written down, so the GM will have taken notes. If you have lines and veils, right? It's not just something that you've said. This is like the GM is responsible for taking notes on that and managing that.
yeah, but I don't just because it's formalized doesn't mean it's been mechanized or gamified. And there's a definitive in my definition, and maybe not for you, but in my definition, there is a mechanism is required in order to be called a safety tool. That's what I'm defining safety
Okay.
tool
I
as.
mean,
And again, there is a specific reason for that is because I don't think that it is necessary or constructive, and in fact can sometimes be, depending on the individual, destructive to call something that isn't really a safety tool like trust and discussion or the open door policy, right? These things are it's just conversation and personal autonomy.
right. So I do see what you're saying, and I think that's why this isn't safety, right? Let's delineate between safety and a safety tool, which is something to help you feel safe. That is not it's not necessarily there to make you be safe. It is to give you the tools to be safe. So if you are relying on these tools, you may not be at a place with the people at the table that you have that trust. Now, and I know what you're saying, vet your players, vet your tables, but that's not always going to be able to happen.
I agree. In fact, Brian's most recent comment, this all gets divided between private and public play, which for me is where the largest divergence in relevance and application comes from, because
100% agree.
You got it. No, I'm kidding.
Yes, I'm not going to say anything else. I'm just reading the comments.
But we're not actually, this is just coming up naturally. I don't know if you've been reading the chat or not, but I understand that there could be a need in a public setting for something like this. If it's like, look, you can't vet everyone. You can't trust everyone. Personally, I don't play at cons. I don't play in public games. And I think that I think that there's a level of consistency there, right? Like, I don't really like safety tools. I don't like to use them if I can avoid it. But also, you should vet your players. You should vet your GM. And putting all of these things together, it's like, why would I subject myself to a con game if these are my perspectives on role playing, and so I don't.
Yeah,
But
which is fair enough, right? And then you're still, and I think you're in a position where you're still able to have games, you have people that you can play with. And there are people that don't have people they can play with. And they are forced into going into online groups with complete strangers or into groups in public settings where they've not met anybody. And that is the only way that they can play, right? So, and again, that's difficult to trust instantly. If you're in a session, and I feel like this is a lot of the people in the conversations that I was part of, that you were part of. I do feel like a lot of people um, are maybe coming in this from perspective of, well, I'm playing with people that I know and trust. Why would I ever need this, right? And that's not the
possibly, yes.
situation. That's not the situation for everybody. And nobody is saying you have to use them.
Oh, for sure. And I'm
Right.
not telling anyone not to use them. And I can certainly sit here and from your perspective see the use cases for these particular tools, for these, devices, mechanisms, whatever. Like I can certainly see that. I don't think it's going to change my opinion on them. And I again, in the video I mentioned, and I think I mentioned this to you as well, it's what it really actually comes down to is a matter of value prioritization. What do you value? How do you prioritize it? And that's going to determine whether or not you think safety tools are silly and useless or paramount and important. You know what I mean? It's just going to be a matter of it's a it's part cultural, part generational, part personal, part experiential.
Sure.
So I don't, especially after like sitting down and laying all of my opinions out like that, it's going to take a lot to kind of move me. Not that you're sitting here to try and,
That's
bring
the
me
thing.
to your, I
Yeah.
don't think what you're doing.
It's quite freeing to not be.
You can just say what you want to say and not worry about it.
But yeah, I think this is help. I do think this is helpful though to break this up because, again, going back to some of the conversations I've been had, it starts to move to X cards very quickly, and that's a whole different I want to get there in a second because it is
Sure.
worth talking about. But it's like it's a really they're two different related things, and I wanted to talk about these things separately first.
Okay, sure.
Because people are fine with the idea of a session zero, and it seems like it's the notion of labeling it a safety tool that's bothering people.
Well, I'm not bothered by it. I just flatly deny that it's a safety tool because it's a conversation, right? It's an expectation, or should be an expectation, of arranging a group around a table to play the game. It's a conversation.
Yes, I guess you're right. It is a conversation. I think where I'm coming from is so I'm going to imagine I'm joining a game at a con, and there are two tables, and one mentions safety tools and one doesn't. I'm going to join the one that mentions safety tools just because I know they're going to facilitate that conversation, whereas
Okay.
I don't know that the other one will.
Okay, reasonable, I think. I'm not going to sit at either table because I'm not.
You're not going to play at a con.
Yeah,
Right.
I'm not playing a con game. It's just not.
Right.
It lacks too many things that I prefer in order for me to put it, to not put it aside. Right? It's impossible to vet players unless I go with a group of people and we all sit down together at the same table. Then it's all of us versus the GM, and that could be an okay situation, right? But if I don't know anyone, huh?
I have a question. I want to
Sure.
Is your vetting players a safety tool?
No, it's making sure you're playing with people who have a similar opinion on what the experience or what it's probably it's a bigger question than just being able to answer off the top of my head like that. But I can say that I definitively do not think vetting players is a safety tool. I think it's a sieve by which you tend to find like-minded individuals with regard to preference in order to play the game. And vetting your players and vetting your GM very frequently comes down to, well, play with your friends, right? Play with the people who you trust. Play with the people who you have these conversations about. Play with these people who you have rapport with, who you know what they like and what they don't like, what they appreciate and don't appreciate. Like, you've already gone through the process of having that relationship and building it over however many years or however many months. And so I don't think, because it's just no, that's not a safety tool. It's just there's
No.
no mechanical there's no mechanical bearing on any game. It's just who you're playing with, that you prefer to play with.
Are you butting up against the word safety or the word tool more?
It's the concept. I don't necessarily think I care what it's called. You could call it something else, and I would still resist the idea that conversation and personal autonomy need to qualify under some sort of umbrella.
Right. Okay. I'm trying to understand, because we actually haven't talked about this, so that's why I'm pressing a little bit, because I'm not fully understanding. Why does it need to be mechanical to qualify? That's why
because
wondering.
That's where my issue lies. My issue is with meta action that points the activity away from role play.
Okay.
So whereas dice is a meta action, rolling dice is a meta action, co-creation is a meta action, tracking hit points is a meta action, those all point toward role play, because they are either accounting for things that happened as the result of, or they feed into role play. I don't view the mechanisms by which safety tools are governed pointing toward role play, because if role play is a conversation, and if I view the safety tool as a method, a conversation stopper, right, as we discussed at the top of the video or top of the stream, then I don't want conversation stoppers in an activity that is built on having a conversation.
Okay.
See what I mean? So I do not. Oop, that was an accident. I do not. It's not like I don't care that they're called safety tools. You could call them conversation tools. I disagree with that name, but you could call them that, and I would still take issue with them.
Yeah, I mean, I do think safety tools is clunky, because it does imply. I think it. Oh, I'm sorry, I keep hitting the cable for my camera.
You're good.
It does imply. I think it does imply a greater level of protection than is there, right? I don't currently have a better name.
Oh, well, here, Candace actually, she says, I would make a distinction between safe practices and safety tools. Driving under the speed limit is a safe practice. Auto-locking seatbelts are safety tools. I think that's
safe. Yeah,
oh,
safety
there's a
practices.
follow-up too. There's a follow-up too. The tool is external and can step in when an unexpected dangerous situation presents itself. Okay.
And there we have the X card, which I guess is a safety tool in that case. Yes, I like that definition.
The X card, and I'm gonna the what is it called? Script change. Those are both safety tools.
Yeah, there's also
for sure
N cards and O cards.
I have no idea what those are.
Interesting. Which, so I think an O card is okay. I'm fine. Largely seems to be for digital, right? Which you can put in the chat like O. So if it's starting to get dicey, people can go O. Um, and N is kind of saying like I'm all right, but I'm starting to freak out, basically. Um, but
So do
yes,
you want to move on to X cards?
yeah, I think that's a good time because I think they're largely understood, except I feel I think they're slightly dismissed or sort of seen as um, things people might throw out sort of randomly,
Okay.
or just
So
because they don't like something, which isn't the intended purpose. It may happen. It may
um
happen, but that's not the intended
yeah,
purpose.
there's it's potentiality versus actualization, and I get that. But since we're going to switch the topic to the X card, the X card was developed by John Stravopoulos in 2012, so it's only about 12 years old. And the X card is one of the earliest, maybe, and most widely recognized safety tools. It provides players with a simple way to indicate discomfort by tapping or holding up or otherwise indicating a card marked with an X. When this happens, the game stops, the content is either skipped or adjusted, and then play resumes. It was designed to be easy to use, require no justification for invoking it. I'll get
Mhm.
there, man. And it gained traction due to its flexibility across RPG settings and genres. So that's what the X card is. If you don't know, not you, the the viewers, but I guarantee everyone knows. I think it's just being clear and providing the history and the date that it was created. I think is pretty valuable. I think I have probably the strongest feelings about the X card, um, and so I'll state my feelings, and then you can give us your perspective, because I know this is one that is particularly at issue with you for misunderstanding, not you misunderstanding it, but your perception that there are people out there misunderstanding it. So the X card, again, if and I'll just state it really plainly, like I did a couple minutes ago. If an RPG is a conversation, then the X card stopping that conversation, um, and particularly without any kind of address whatsoever. So it's very final. There's finality here. You indicate the X card. That's it. We have to stop and move on. There's no conversation around what maybe we could do to help. Maybe there are some other players at the table who would like to continue to role play. Is this a good time for you to excuse yourself for a couple of minutes and get a glass or a snack? Like none of that. It's just okay, stop. And so, in my perspective, it's a control tool, not something to empower the individual to help them achieve autonomy or agency within the game. So that's my view of the X card. It is a very hard line. It's probably the one that I have the most disdain for. And again, just like I said in the other video, none of these opinions mean that I'm not going to play a game that happens to use X cards. I prefer to play with people. And so if there's someone that I want to play with, we'll figure out a way to sit down at a table and play. And if that means there's X cards, then okay, I can capitulate to that. But I have very, very strong opinions on the X card.
Yeah. Um, so yeah, let's see. I think first of all, I want to say that I think the introduction of them, or like for instance, like in the DMG, it is said like maybe the player does need to leave the table, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, that is part of that conversation. Maybe they do need to go away for a bit. Um, and I will concede to you this: it is control. Um, I think it is, if it's being used for what it is intended to be used for, which is that someone is having a traumatic response to somebody, by which I mean they are actually triggered into survival mode. So they are in either fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, one of those modes, in which case they're in their lizard brain, um, and will be struggling to function in general. So forcing a conversation on them is unfair. Um, that is its intended purpose. That is rare, unlikely, but possible in games when you're dealing with the kinds of content that often come up in fantasy role play. Right? Now, especially just some people are just not awesome people and will push boundaries. Um, I've no I have no idea. I just looked at the chat now and I don't know. I don't know.
Uh,
Potentially. Um,
is there a particular comment?
apparently we're harvesting the chat. I don't know. Um,
Oh yeah.
right. So if that happens and you go into that traumatic response and you can actually tie it to a trigger that for some reason either is a line that's been crossed, that's stated. First of all, if it's a line that's been crossed, that's a huge issue. That's a big red flag about the player that crossed it. And that's a whole conversation that needs to happen. But if it's a trigger that wasn't stated, potentially one that the individual wasn't aware of, if they're actually able to connect those dots, yeah, that I do feel strongly that needs to be respected. And if it's facilitating the player to leave the table for a bit, fine, but it could mean stopping. They could be unable to do much else. And as somebody who feels strongly about this, I would be the most pissed, I think, about the abuse of this. Somebody throwing it out and being like, I don't want to do that. Like this is something that is to be taken extremely seriously. Um, it, and in my opinion, it really should only be used in an emergency.
So I understand what you're saying, but and again, this is going to come from value prioritization. So let's say I have an issue, and I have many, but let's say I have an issue, and let's say that I am at a game, something comes up that I've not prepped anyone for, that they don't know is an issue for me, and I decide that in the moment, you know what, the way that I handle it is that I'll get up and I'll go get a snack, I'll go get a glass of water, I'll come back and sit down in an amount of time that I think might resolve the issue, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is it longer than just 5 minutes? Is it a main component of someone's character? There's some aspect of someone's character that is just going to be ever present, or maybe it's a staple of the campaign. Something regarding the particular campaign causes you an issue and it's going to be ever present. The way that I would personally attempt to handle this is to just maybe try to get through it. And if for some reason I can't, then I would excuse myself from the table in perpetuity. I would just say, look, something's going on. I can't handle it. I apologize. But what I would not do is try to put the responsibility of my own issues on the shoulders of anyone else at the table, because if I am, and I'm very happy to say that I am not a normal brained individual, right? If I am not normal brained, I don't think it's reasonable or rational to ask someone who is normal brained, insofar as I can perceive it, to behave in a way as though they are likewise suffering from my particular issue. So if I have an aversion to, I don't know, stucco on building walls. I just really don't like stucco. And I know this is a silly example, but I'm making it silly to make the point. I just really don't like stucco. And we come into this village, and as a cultural, point of how they build buildings, there's stucco on every single last one of their damn huts, right? And that just really gets to me. I'm not going to ask someone who doesn't have a problem with the stucco to behave as though, and I know, look, stucco is inconsequential. It's really easy to just go, okay, it's stone. Okay, it's wood. Okay, it's something else. But that's not, the fact that the example is bad is not really material. I can still make the point. So I can't ask someone who is not at odds with stucco to behave as though they are, because that's not fair. So that's for me to deal with. It's my issue. And I would bet that there are the vast majority of people likely do not have issues with stucco. And so I am now in a hyper minority of probably just one, right?
Yeah.
And so for me to, as a hyper minority of one, at the very least a minority of one at the table, I would say that it's probably uncommon for such a small sample size to contain, unless it's, obviously, unless the issue is just rife or ubiquitous in a particular area. I find it, I just wouldn't do that to someone, right? And again, I want to follow that up with the fact that this is a value prioritization perspective. So you may come from a different spot, you may have a different perspective, and you may place importance on different things, and none of that's ever going to be a criticism, at least not here. But that's my perspective. So
Yeah.
I will say that I then probably extrapolate out that out to the broader population. If I am doing it this way, then I would expect that others would probably do it that way, or I would prefer that others do it that way, or I would expect that it's at least the norm or a standard that others would do it that way. So that's the extrapolation that takes place. And additionally, if I'm the only one at the table with an issue, with a specific issue, yeah, BGD stucco, I'm sorry. See, I hit the guy who doesn't like stucco. That was an accident. I'm sorry. It's totally my fault. So I, at the table, am likely, especially if, as in the scenario you've proposed, where it is unexpected, right?
Mhm.
You don't know that you're going to get struck, but it strikes you. I've said enough. You go ahead and go ahead and counter and follow up and club me over the head if you need to. But that's where I'm coming from. That's my perspective.
Yes, and you explained your perspective to me, and I appreciate it. I do have a different take on it, which is that I'm going to talk about it in two modes. I'm going to talk about it first as the other player, the player who's getting X'd, right? I've done something, and I've said stucco, and you've said that really bothers me.
Okay.
I do not see it as you were asking me to behave as though it bothers me. I approach it as, I know that bothers you, and I want to play with you,
Mm-hmm.
and I want you to have a good time. That's the whole point of me playing a game with other people. Therefore, I am going to adjust so that you can enjoy the game, because I want you to enjoy the game so that we can all enjoy the game together.
And I absolutely appreciate that. And in the face of being confronted by that, like, let's swap positions, right? You're the one at issue. I'm the one being confronted because you've said it's made you uncomfortable. In the moment, because I know you and because I want to continue to play the game with you, I, of course, would express as compassionate a response as I can. And I would do whatever I could to make sure that we could continue to play together, right? So the opinion that I'm expressing, the perspective that I'm expressing, is not compassionless, and that's why I turned it around on myself, to give myself the issue. Because while I know that I can behave in a certain way, confronted with any given issue, because I have value prioritization that it's unpacked in a certain way. Um, but I also know that not everyone who I might want to play with will have those same prioritizations. And so sometimes there will be a confrontation, but that's a conversation, right? That's you coming to me directly and saying, hey, I have this issue. And I imagine it would likely take place away from the table. Hey, I'm going to go get a drink. Hey, Bacon, can you come here and help me out with something? Hey, bro, I'm really having an issue with X, Y, or Z. Oh, my fault. Yeah, sure, no problem.
Yeah.
And that's a conversation, and that's conversation is the crux of the entire activity.
And you and I are able to have those conversations. I'm not able to have those conversations with everybody, right? Like let's make this personal for a second, right? Those conversations can't be had with everybody, and you can't always get into it and explain it with everybody. And if you are, and I said this to you in our private chats, if you are throwing an X card, right, you are playing at a table where you have agreed to use them. So
Yeah.
this is so that's part of your social contract, if you want to call it that.
Sure.
Right? So you've agreed to it. You've agreed to it ahead of time. And
sure, yeah, if you're using them at the table, then ostensibly you've agreed to it ahead of time. But agreeing to it and liking it are two different things.
Right, to it like it, but to throw it back in your direction, you can leave the table, right? If you don't like it.
Well, yeah.
Right.
Yes, I can look at that table and go, oh, they're using X cards, not a table for me, and move on. Right. Absolutely, yes.
And just like I can be like, actually, you know what? This is not a table for me because I don't feel like I'm going to be like comfortable or safe here, right? And I want to address something because I've seen it a little bit in the chat. I've seen it a few times in all of these conversations. I am so tired of having to be resilient. I am. I've been through enough. And if something's come up for me, and I've said this really bothers me, it's very serious for me to have said so. And maybe I am making it everybody else's problem by asking somebody to respect that I'm having an issue. But I'm tired of having to be resilient for the sake of it, just because people don't understand what it's like. And it just is.
See, this is where you and I are going to differ.
Yeah.
Quite strongly. I think that life demands resilience, regardless of how much anyone has been through. I have been through quite a bit. I'm sure you have been through I know that you've been through quite a bit. You know that I've been through quite a bit. And life demands resilience. And I wouldn't require someone who has not been asked to be as resilient as me to attempt to be as resilient for me. Because I'm the only one who knows what I've gone through.
But you're not asking that, right? You're not. Well, you're not asking them
correct. And I think that's where the perspective is different, because I would never ask that of someone, right? Because, and again, if I'm having an issue at the table, I'm getting up and leaving. That's resilience, right? Okay, you know what? Table's not for me. I'll see y'all later. Whatever the reason, whether it's because there's safety tools and I don't want to deal with that, whether they're not playing as in character as frequently as I want them to, or they're doing it poorly, or the GM is bad, or I just don't like someone at the table, right? that all is a matter of resilience. I don't think that it's, I'm not going to say not fair, but it's not something that I would ask someone to do, to say, hey, I don't like you, you get up and leave. That's like saying, I'm a vegan, you don't eat meat. Like, you can't do that.
No.
You're the vegan, you don't eat meat, but you don't tell me not to eat meat, right? And that's how I'm equating it. It's not something that I would ever put on someone else. And that's my perspective. And again, I'm not, that's not a criticism. That's just where I'm coming from. All of these statements are I statements. So I'm not going to say, you know.
No, I understand that. I got lost with asking someone to leave the table. I've frozen. Ah, Jesus. Hang on.
Take your time.
Oh, it's just not. I'll just have to switch cameras. There we go. We'll just switch cameras up. Yeah. I got lost with who's asking someone to leave the table though.
Well, in my scenario, I would be the one who was upset, and then I would be the one asking someone to leave the table. And I likened that to me being a vegan, which I'm not, by the way, but I likened it to me being a vegan and then pointing my finger and saying, because I'm a vegan, you can't eat meat.
Right. But you wouldn't serve a vegan meat either.
Well, not if I knew it, right? But I also, like, there is a measure of autonomy that I don't think that we're accounting for here, right? They stepped to the table, right? If you go into a steakhouse, people are going to be eating meat, right? You can decide beforehand that that's not somewhere that you want to be. And if you go in there, you can decide, hey, my friends are here, they're eating, I'm not going to eat anything. Maybe they have a salad for me. But then maybe at some point you figure, you know, and I think that this is, you know, it's
we're going down a rabbit hole.
Yeah, it's like we're kind of getting out of control here. But, you know, maybe I can order a salad or whatever, and I can sit there and sit down and have the conversation while people are eating their meat off their plates. But, you know, let's say that bothers me. And my option is to get up and leave, or to point my finger and say, you know, I am a vegan, therefore you can't eat meat. One of them is reasonable. And this all came out of a conversation of resilience, right? So one of them, the resilient part is, well, let's see if I can handle it. Responsibility is, well, if I can't handle it, then it's on me to leave. Like, I have to be the one to change my own situation.
Yeah, I guess so. I think it is necessarily, this version of it is exclusionary, and it doesn't have to be when it's as simple as adjusting from something that's like causing harm to somebody. It just really,
well, it depends on,
because it's a game, right? It's a game.
Yes, it's a game, but it's a game that people engage in for a wide variety of reasons. And I don't, if you want to sit down at a table and play without safety tools, play without X cards or something, and I think this is especially because none of the safety tools that I've really looked into were developed by people in the mental health field, right? At the minimum, we have Monty Cook, whose checklist borrowed from or sought input from mental health professionals, but it wasn't designed by a mental health professional. And so they're all community created and community implemented. And while I would say that most of the data that we have is self-report data on their effectiveness. Some people love them. Some people think that it really provides an environment that they're more happy in, that they feel better in order to play a game. There's no real scientific rigor regarding their actual effectiveness. And so because of that, and I'm not going to poo-poo them, like I'm not going to poo-poo them because of that, but I will say that because of that fact, the weight placed on someone who says I like them is the same as someone who says I don't like them.
Agreed.
Okay.
I fully buy into what you're saying.
Okay.
And make it all, what it's making me think is like, oh shit, like I know somebody who does like mental health and TTRPG. I wonder if they are developing any better mechanisms. But it's, yeah, no. And if it hasn't come across, I said it at the top, and like I said, I'm passionate about this and it matters to me. But I do believe that you have every right not to use them, and I don't really care if you do or don't use them. It's more about like, one of the reasons I wanted to have this conversation with you was I felt like they were being misunderstood. And it was like, I kind of wanted to be like, well, I wish people would just understand why they're being used rather than just dismissing them out of hand. And that was what it really came down to. So I feel like a little bit like it's come across like I've been trying to convince you to use them, and I'm not. And I would be comfortable playing with you without them, because I know we've known each other a long time, and I know that would be fine. And I know certain topics wouldn't come up by necessity. I just know it. But yeah, yeah, I don't know. I'm starting to ramble. You're
Okay.
highlighting loads. You've got 40 starred comments.
Yeah, I have a lot of starred comments. Do you want to start getting to the comments?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, cool. So we'll start here. TPR says, I don't think I've ever heard anyone on either side of this issue address the actual premise. How do you define safety in this context, and how can a game actually be dangerous? So I think that's probably a question addressed to you. So I'm going to let you take that, unless you feel put on the spot, in which case I'll give it a shot.
How can a game actually be dangerous? Well, obviously, the notion of
there's a follow-up. I'm sorry, before you start,
Okay.
I'm so sorry, there's a follow-up. So he says, in my not so humble opinion, a game, story, or any other fictional experience exists to be able to go through experiences that would be dangerous or risky in real life I'll get there, in a fashion which is not actually dangerous. So he's asking for the qualification of both safety and danger in the context of a game that isn't actually dangerous. Or maybe physically dangerous. I don't know.
That's a purely physical definition of danger. Psychological danger is very real and can occur anywhere in a game or out of a game. And just because the game is make-believe doesn't mean that you may not be affected in a very real psychological way, because the subconscious, right, your lizard brain, your dreaming brain does not differentiate between pretend and real, right? But what you tell to that part of your brain, that part of your brain is accepting as fact. And so if that part of the brain starts to take over, it doesn't matter that it's pretend. It's the same reason that people have, a really good example is Saving Private Ryan caused massive problems in World War II veterans because the D-Day sequence was so realistic.
All right. Well, then does this not mean then that the implementation of safety tools by, so, gosh, this is so complicated. Provided that some safety tools borrow from some mental health tools, right? And provided those mental health tools were developed to be used in a monitored, guided therapy session by mental health experts, does this not smack of, it's sort of it's a mockery of, it's an in-practice mockery of actual therapy, because someone external, someone non-licensed and uneducated can grab that tool and say, okay, well, I'm therapist now, and we're going to make sure that it seems like it's shifting the concern from having a game with a group around a table to an entirely separate activity, which is self-regulation, resilience, emotional constitution, those sorts of things. And then also, to take it just a bit further, which is 100% a hypothetical and maybe immaterial to the conversation, but is it not then the possibility that people will continue to take tools outside of their intended environment from the mental health profession and begin to start to sprinkle them throughout the game? Is that not also a danger?
I mean, I don't think that's what's happening here. So there's a very real difference
reasonable.
There's a very real difference between treating trauma and dealing with trauma. Those are two very different things, right?
Okay, reasonable.
Right? And you can have methods by which you return yourself to a regulated state, or people help you return yourself to a regulated state. And then you have ways that you are actually dealing with trauma, which is to be done in therapy with licensed professionals and guidance.
And here we actually, if I can just briefly interrupt you. Stochastic Agency proposes to Mike M., what about the work being done in RPG therapeutics and others like them? And Mike, who is a professional in the field, says, or maybe pre-PhD or PhD, I missed the comment. Let me...
It's a doctoral level psychologist. Mike,
okay, so
I have a project going I'd love to talk to you about.
So, Stochastic Agency, those are great, and work there needs to be done, but a therapeutic RPG is not the same as ones for fun or those involved. Correct. Like normal RPGs. So, and that's kind of the point that I was making, right? So I was asking if importing tools that are designed to be used in specific professional, monitored, guided circumstances by licensed professionals, is that not like, I mean, to me that seems...
that's, I think, getting messy. Yeah. I would agree with that, getting messy. You do have people doing TTRPG therapy. I'm not convinced that they've studied it properly. There's definitely, so TTRPGs are therapeutic in and of their nature. They are just by themselves therapeutic. Using them as therapy is a whole different thing, and it's group therapy for one. So it's getting very, very messy. But yeah. So I think I agree with you. Like we shouldn't be mapping actual therapy tools into the session. I don't think that's what they're doing.
Well, that's a good thing.
Yeah.
We agree on that. So we'll go ahead down the line here. I still have 39 starred. So Brian says, one aspect is the constant refrain of, we're here to have fun. Well, okay, what's fun to you? What's fun for one might not be fun for another. This is absolutely correct. And I don't necessarily think that someone not having fun in a certain way makes them able to be criticized. I mean, that's a really broad statement. I got to narrow that real quick before I get myself into trouble. So what I'm going to say is that specifically with regard to safety tools, if someone prefers them at the table to have their fun, or if someone prefers them not at the table to have their fun, those are equally valid views. That's what I'm saying.
I think we're agreeing on that.
I think so too. I think we
Yeah.
agree on that particular point.
Yeah.
So BGD says, when you put forth that a table does not have to use safety tools, quote, if you also hold that an abstaining table can still be made to, or can still make play safe, then that addresses the question of necessity that he raised. This is going back to the conversation, I guess, that you guys had in Discord. So you don't
Yes.
have to use them, and a table can still be made safe without them. There is no real necessity for safety tools. It then becomes a priority or a preference.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. I'm glad he's here because I wanted to mention him before because he was talking. You mentioned value prioritization and something that he was talking about in Discord as well.
Mm-hmm.
So it's true. Yeah.
Okay. Stochastic agency. This looks like it is a multiple comment. So you can also look at the concept of verisimilitude. How believable does your living world need to be? Their usage and this is safety tools. Their usage and application can start before you even. Oh no, these are actually separate comments. Apologies. So you can also look at the concept of verisimilitude. How believable does your living world need to be? Completely agree, right? We don't need everything in a game even for the sake of verisimilitude, right? Because there are certain things that in real life you do or don't consider. And you and I, Brian, were talking about this the other night with regard to petitioning the GM for information. Like, I don't need to petition anyone for information when I can see, smell, hear, touch, when I'm like, when I'm approaching a small gap that I want to leap over. And this is the exact example I used with Brian. I can constantly see the gap. I can see how close I'm getting to it. I can feel how fast I'm moving with the contact my feet are making with the ground. I can hear the wind whipping by. I can, and I'm constantly assessing and reassessing all the way up until the point that I get to the edge and I decide, yes, I can do this, or no, I can't. I either pull back or I jump. You don't need to account for all of that, right? So verisimilitude in the world is just, I leap the gap. But there are some times where there are certain aspects of a world that you want to include to make them more true, I'll say, instead of trying that mouthful, verisimilitudinous or whatever that might be. It's probably not even a real word.
I like it.
All right. Next is, again, Brian. So their usage, safety tools, their usage and application can start before you even play. Ever played Spectre by in the World of Darkness or even Wraith? This is he's referencing a conversation again, the same one that we had last night. And so, you like there are going to be games where you need because Spectre in particular. I don't know if you're familiar with it.
No.
So in Wraith, in by White Wolf in the World of Darkness, every character has two players. There's the Wraith player and there's the Shadow player. The Shadow player is designed to turn the Wraith toward oblivion. The Shadow wants the Wraith gone. The Shadow wants to end existence, right? And so, as a Wraith, you have fetters that are defined by your death in life. And then a Spectre is what happens when the Shadow wins, right? So when the Shadow wins, when the Shadow takes over, when the Shadow bends the entire being toward oblivion, that's what a Spectre is. And Spectres are unkind. The point of the game is sort of to explore, like really lean into and press on very difficult, very awful, very gross feeling topics. And so in a game like Spectre, I don't think that safety tools are appropriate. But I think Spectre is a very easy game to look at and go, nope, that's not for me.
Yeah, we talked about that like at the very beginning, didn't we? Where it was like it may come to, it might just be you write it off from the very get-go. Like you do have to be aware. Like I will concede that there's a level of personal responsibility in terms of like being aware of environment, and not putting yourself in situations knowingly that are dangerous for you.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's just that it's not always stuff comes up.
Stuff can come up.
Stuff comes up.
I can certainly grant that. Uh, okay, so this is a follow up to BGD. I split his comment. Apologies. My second challenge was one of sufficiency, specific to the X card, but applicable to other tools. I hold that mere employment of an X card without context beyond its purpose does not ensure safe play. I agree with that, um, but I don't think that that's really informative. I think that, provided the opinions I've expressed here, that seems pretty obvious to me. Because I think that, it's a conversation. So the X card in and of itself is not sufficient. It's a conversation. Um, even let me make sure I'm getting this correctly. Hold that the mere employment of the X card without context beyond its purpose does not ensure safe play. I would maybe need a bit more on that. I think. Yeah. Can you maybe, if you're able to, BGD in the comments, just kind of, and I'll get to it. Probably at the end here. Do you have anything?
I think I need more as well, but I think
Okay.
it could be about like throwing an X without any agreement to it or like any establishing boundaries to it, but I'm not sure.
Okay. Back to Brian. Session 0 can operate as a safety valve, sure. Not everyone who plays might want an open discussion of some subjects, though, especially with more personal they become. Sure. I can certainly agree to that. I think I've agreed to it in the conversation that we've been having here. I think that there are, sometimes you get blindsided, right? What can you do?
Yeah.
And I think that, like you said, Session 0 can serve a purpose for things that you are aware of. But in a situation where you're not aware of it, you can get blindsided in the moment. And it's just, I've expressed how I would personally deal with it. And so that translates to an expectation of how I would ask or how I would expect others to deal with it. And that informs my opinion. But again, I'm not trying to be completely uncompassionate here, right? Like there are conversations that can take place. You can break from the game. You can say, you know what? If someone does get up in a very noticeably agitated way, and it isn't just, there's a lack of self-control to go, and that's not a criticism. There's just a lack of self-control in the moment to say, hey, I got to get a snack or a drink or just kind of make it innocuous. If there is some sort of violent evacuation, then you go, okay, you know what? We need to go and check on Bacon and see what caused that issue. But it's a conversation because the whole scenario is a conversation. The whole activity is a conversation. To me, from my perspective.
That makes sense. And I think I guess in fairness, there can be an element of a lack of self-control, but that's part of, like for me, that's part of a disability, right? So
I didn't say that. I wasn't saying that to be denigrating.
No. It wasn't taken that way at all.
Okay.
It's more like I'm aware that so like cards on the table for the chat and for people watching, like I have PTSD. So there are certain things that will cause very profound specific reactions that I don't have full control over. I can get full control, but I might not initially. So yeah, like I think there is an element to that, where it's like it's about ability for me, right?
Okay,
so yeah.
Oh, oops. Well, whatever. So
I think we covered
PPR
that.
asks, how is that different than Justice Session 0? So there's two follows up here, but I'm going to say that this is at the beginning of the stream when you and I were, I think, particularly discussing lines and veils. So he said,
Yeah.
"Oh, that was the wrong click." How is it that? How is it that? How is that different than just a session zero? I honestly don't see the distinction in what you're saying, Jax. I do agree with everything you're saying on its face, but I don't see why it needs to be called a safety tool. And then he says basically what Bacon said, and I starred that to be a jerk. So there we go. So the question was to you.
No, I think we largely covered it, though. I don't know if I have anything more to
okay,
say
sure,
on it, but
sure, sure.
yeah. Unless there's anything you wanted to add.
Oh, I think I, like you said, I think we addressed it pretty well in full.
Yeah.
Mike M says this is a worthwhile conversation when done with tact and respect, and I agree. I agree.
When done with tact and respect, not us.
Okay, BGD. I play RPGs with and GM for dozens of strangers in person and online each year. That's true. I've been a part of his games, and he's great. I don't consider myself a particularly vulnerable person, and I hold no disdain for meeting new people at the game table. Completely agree with you there. I don't know if that informs my perspective on safety tools, but I know I almost always have a good time gaming as long as there is a reasonable, common apprehension of the underlying social contract. I will take that for insight because, as I previously admitted, I don't play con games like live, and I will only play like digital con games with people that I don't know if I'm invited by at least one person that I do know. So BGD invited me to his game, and because I know him and because we have a rapport with one another, I played the game. Had a great time. It was fantastic. All the players were great. I'm looking forward to doing it again this year. But I will take this for insight because I do not have the depth and breadth of experience that you do. So then click this first, then this. This is TPR saying, I love Bacon's take on meta actions. I appreciate that. Because this is, what? I'm going to be a little self-ingratiating, okay? Self-aggrandizing. BGD says, I also feel like the vast majority of the games I play in, and all of the ones I run myself, are safe environments for all participants, whether I knew them when the game started or they are new friends.
That's awesome. I mean, that's a pretty good goal as a GM.
I agree, and I think this sort of indicates that, just because, and I think it's a very important point to be made, right? Because I think it's so easy, and you even maybe mentioned this previously in a conversation that we had, around back behind the scenes. You said that you thought that I was kind of catching a storm of crap just because I'm expressing the bad opinion, right? Like I'm kind of, whenever anyone says, "Oh, I don't like safety tools," there's a sort of propensity to draw the line down the center of the field, and this team goes to the left and that team goes to the right. Now you're just against each other.
Right.
And I think that it is a very important point to make, that just because you don't like safety tools for whatever reason doesn't mean there's a lack of compassion at the table, or that there's a lack of provision for someone's needs, whatever they might be. Maybe there is, but
100%.
each table is going to be different. Say again?
I said 100%. Like you're a very compassionate person, and very caring. I wouldn't suggest otherwise. And I think what's interesting, I don't even like safety tools. I just think they're needed sometimes.
That's
I would love if we did
new information. That is new information.
Would love it if they weren't necessary.
Yeah, I would expect you to come from that angle. That's new information.
Yeah.
That I'm happy to have. So Brian again, to BGD, a general level of courtesy is always appreciated at social gatherings. True and accurate. Trey G, thank you for stopping by. Hello. Says session 0, I think, is to set expectations for both players and GM. If you are running a PG game versus an R-rated game, if it's horror, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, session zero should be an expectation setter. You sit everyone around, you say, okay, I want to play this game and I want to give it this tone. Is everyone okay with that? I've played that game before. I don't really like that game. Maybe we can, I have this new game over here. Maybe we could play that as a whole. It should be a situation where you sit down, speak your piece, come to an agreement, and then begin playing the game. And it's a level set for sure. It sets expectations. I, for one, do like session zero, because insofar as it functions as a social contract, and within that contract, because I tend to be a bit of a legalistic bastard, I think that it's always good to have the expectation written down. Here, I will send you an email so that when it comes back to bite me like I know it's going to, I can point to the email and say, remember when you agreed to this. So I agree with Trey. Brian, unfortunately, many people have no idea what will trigger a psychosomatic response. So Candace Pant's series use of unexpected is understandable. And that's from the previous that's from the previous comment that Candace had made. This is Brian nodding assent, I believe. Following up with, and again, if it does arise, it's kind of a personal responsibility to maintain one's own resilience to the unexpected. And I think this is maybe a comment that led us down that path in the conversation.
I saw a couple of these, yeah.
And I, not to be heartless, and I don't feel like I maybe addressed this appropriately in the moment. It can be tiring, right? Having to be resilient can be tiring. There's a whole manner of things that you just don't want to deal with. You shouldn't have to deal with, right? But the nature of reality is that, well, shit, I have to deal with them. So I don't want to make it seem like I'm communicating this like suck it up kind of mentality. I get it. Sometimes you can't, sometimes you just don't want to. And so pardon me, Jax, if in the moment I seemed callous. And that's why I turned it around on myself. That's why I always make the example of myself, because I don't want to, I don't want to start pointing my finger.
No, I don't think you seemed callous. I talked about this a little bit in our Facebook chat, which is living abroad can very much change perspective as well. I think Americans have a very particular view on this kind of stuff.
Rugged individualism. Yes.
So I think that comes into play a little bit.
I think that I agree with that for sure. It's it's a cultural perspective as well as like I've said, generational, blah, blah, blah. You've heard me say it a million times, or 3. Sometimes it feels like a million. So TPR says, this is going to sound much harsher than I intended, but not sure how to soften it. When I hear the word trigger, it comes across as someone with a private issue making it everyone else's problem. I don't know why I started this. I don't know if I'm necessarily of the same opinion. I think that trigger is, well, I understand your perspective, but I don't think I share it. I'll just say that.
Yeah, I think trigger has been sort of co-opted by the masses, and it has lost a lot of its meaning. It has a very specific, meaning when it comes to like psychological impact. So it doesn't simply mean like you're offended or like a bit upset, right? It means you are literally traumatically affected.
Yeah, I think that. Yeah, I think that there are misuses of that word for sure. Yeah. But I don't think my gut reaction isn't to always expect it to be a misuse. So I'll phrase it that way. So I think that, TPR, with regard to what you said, I think that, yes, that's certainly a part of it. Yes. But I don't think that's a complete picture. Brian again. Asking Candace, what would you define as dangerous for a game that involves killing, looting, or other antisocial aspects? Where's the line drawn? And then Candace follows up with, to clarify, I'm not a proponent of safety tools. For someone who is, I would expect it to be a situation not clarified by session 0 that is triggering to the player. But I don't generally... Say again?
She's dead on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and that's a really solid, effective way of phrasing it. It's a situation not clarified by session zero that is triggering to the player. But I don't generally see safety tools as I understand them to be used today to be a good solution for that in a private game. Haven't thought about it in a public con situation, full disclosure. So 1, 2, 3. Here's BGD. Only a couple more to get through. I know that we're verging on the hard out. BGD. In such a circumstance where one player unwittingly crosses a line that another player has not anticipated, acknowledged, or disclosed, both participants are potentially vulnerable as they respond. I think I agree to that.
Yeah. No. Yeah. It is. There's a vulnerability in being called out. Absolutely. Um, yeah.
And Mike, I hope I got the whole comment here. I was looking for one that came before, and I either just missed it or I can't find it. But Mike says conversation about what tripped the card with the table, but to my mind, the issue is when. That conversation may not be possible right away. It may need to be had when things are cooler for all. This makes sense to me. In fact, generally speaking, the fewer interruptions to the game, the better. That's not saying that if an emergency comes up or if a heavy, I'm not saying don't ever interrupt the table. What I'm saying is that it's probably usually best to handle in this way, as Mike says, from my perspective. And it's not always going to hold true, and I get that. Candace says, true, but my definition of fun doesn't outweigh 3 other people's definition. If they're enjoying it as is, and I'm not, it's my place to step away, not my place to require acquiescence to my enjoyment. And that's the same opinion that I expressed. So I agree with Candace. I don't think that's a surprise. But I think that, again, I think that this is a matter of value prioritization, right? So just because I have this particular set of values doesn't necessarily mean that someone else is going to. They're going to have different perspectives based on that prioritization. TPR says that's where a conversation comes in. Conversations about personal experiences, sensitive issues, whatever, always involve a shared vulnerability. Okay, I think that was in response to what Mike had said. Let me see here. That one was not to us. Oh, here we go. I accidentally served a vegan buttered popcorn during a game I GM'd. I didn't know he was a vegan. When he asked if it had butter and I found out, I apologized. He didn't eat the popcorn. In future games, I used coconut oil instead of butter on the popcorn. Simple conversation. And, again, that's I guess, to the point that I was making about I can't say because I'm a vegan, you can't eat meat. No, that's, I don't think, correct. What I want. Okay, here we go. Mike says, I'm not sure that everyone has the same level of resilience or coping ability. I certainly would agree with that. That's not someone else's fault. But if they want that person in the group, then some sort of conversation needs to occur. I agree. And I think that this is what I was communicating or trying to communicate. That it's not someone's fault if they have higher or lower thresholds. And I think that, that is where the conversation needs to occur. You?
I don't have anything. I think it's
Okay, cool.
I think you covered it there. Like I was lost in thought about it, but I don't have anything good to add.
Disagree. Hard disagree.
Hard disagree.
So this is Candace replying to Brian. So in this scenario, fun is enjoyment and the activity is laid out in advance. So the experience that you agreed to have at the table. I'm expecting gore and viscera in a horror game. I come in expecting that and can enjoy it. I might not enjoy that same thing if I load it up in Animal Crossing, right? And Isabel gets disemboweled out of nowhere.
She's kind of annoying though.
Pretty great example. I love Isabel. How dare you? I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Isabel is very annoying. So
Desperate to get Max into it. I think he'd like it.
It's hard not to like.
Right.
I'll tell you what. I will say this: my very first experience with Animal Crossing, just a little aside, everyone, give me a minute. My very first experience with Animal Crossing was the one for GameCube. I think just Animal Crossing, and I couldn't understand it. How could someone enjoy this? What is the deal? I just couldn't get into it. And then later on, it was like, no, I get it. It's a simple life. It's I totally came around. I really like Animal Crossing.
I just want to live on my island and dig up fossils. That's all I
Yeah,
want to
I got everything I need on this island. Who knows where the money comes from? It's coming from elsewhere. But hey, if I can keep digging up fossils and catching bugs to sell for gold, I'm all over it.
I am so much better at making money in Animal Crossing than I am in real life.
True. TPR says Monty Cook designs amazing games, but I very much dislike the community guidelines he puts forward. Like Bacon says, who made him an authority on that subject? I would agree with that for sure. And then here's a very important comment by Mike, doctoral level psychologist here. I'm not sure mental health professionals understand TTRPGs enough to develop such tools for TTRPGs. And I think that's a very important thing to keep in mind.
There's real issues in the studies that have been done. I could go on and on. I'm gonna hit Mike up on the Discord. We're gonna talk.
Yeah. So that's currently what I have. Let me see. I think there's like 40 more. Oh, okay. Yeah. Let's see here. Let's see. What do we got? Let me see.
I will throw it while you're looking. I'll throw it out to questions if anybody has questions.
Yeah, I think there's definitely going to be some stuff that we want to review here. They're not designed for therapy to begin with. I agree with this. I don't think that they are, and I think Jax would agree with this. Yeah. These tools are not designed for therapy, but they're borrowed. Some of them are borrowed from therapy, in my view, erroneously, and then applied erroneously because of the expectation of them being a therapy tool, even though they've been taken out of their appropriate environment for use. BGD says here, even an educated, credentialed mental health professional can GM a problematic game as a part of therapy or outside it. That's certainly true.
Mm-hmm. TTRPGs by Freud. Can you imagine?
So TTRPG as a therapeutic means is still under investigation. The lines of research have not centralized. And again, this is from Mike, the doctor. So let's see here.
Yeah, they have.
Hey, he's very happy to connect.
Yes,
so if you want to hit him up on Discord.
To do it because I've got a project I want
okay.
talk to him about. But yeah, people are trying to sell it, so just be on the lookout for that. Like, be wary. I'm a little skeptical of it.
Yekrep, fun is vague and subjective. Watching a scary movie can be fun, even though it makes people feel fear. Agree. Let's see here. And then Brian, you hit the nail on the head. Just because I love the Hannibal series, both written and in film, doesn't necessarily mean that it'd be fun to have Hannibal at the party. Anon says the X card can communicate distress, but not force particular responses. It's literally why it cannot work as intended in groups which lack the requisite trust and respect. So even with an X card, Anon is proposing that trust and respect is it's just a standard prerequisite, If you're going to be gaming with people, you have to have trust and respect in order to get the outcomes you want. And,
Yes, yes, you do. You do. But if it's not respect, like this is getting so complicated, right? All right. It depends on what we're talking about here, but right, like so. But if you, depending on what the issue is, right? So I'll just use me as an example because that's the best I can do.
Mhm.
I have trouble recognizing when people are or are not crossing those boundaries. Having something codified that I can look to and say, oh no, this is bad, that this is a line that's very clearly been crossed. Because basically I have a broken alarm. It's basically a broken alarm system, right? So, which is what happens. So you learn that, oh, all of these unsafe things, that's normal. So that it becomes very difficult to recognize or to tell what safe and unsafe actually is. So you do actually need to rely on indicators. Now, as you heal, you get better at that, and you don't necessarily need it as much. So yes, if it doesn't have the lack of trust and respect, it won't work, but that would indicate to you, oh, this is not a safe space for me, and you can leave. Whereas without that, you may think, this is a me problem, not that person doesn't trust or respect me. Do you see what I'm saying? So it's like, yes, but in failing, it kind of works, in my opinion, for that person, for the person that it's intended for.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is people just agreeing with Anon. Single conversation. Is anybody thinking that Jax and Bacon are discussing us? Have the discussion. Meta. Yeah, well, look, if I'm going to be accused of farming, I'm going to farm, okay? Sable Phoenix says, I'm
We
so
said
meta.
we liked Animal Crossing. I don't know what you want from us.
Huh?
So we said we liked Animal Crossing.
Yeah.
It's all picking fruit.
Yakrap, this is precisely the point I made the other day. Play with people you trust, thoroughly vet new players. Agree. The Holy Trinity, talk to the players, play the right game, and don't be a dick. Solid advice. Question to you, Jax. Do you tend to play with strangers? Oh, you already answered it.
Yes.
Okay.
I run games for strangers.
Well, this is very kind.
That was kind, yeah, and I apologize back.
Oh, you're all over the chat. What the hell am I doing? Man, I'm just missing the conversation. Everyone's over here. I'm the last to know. Let's see here.
Nobody's dropped any questions in, so I'm assuming.
Yep. Okay. I think we've gotten to the end of it. And yes, the GameCube one was a classic once I got over my consternation. Yes. It took me a little bit, but I got there. Okay.
You want a fact about me?
Sure.
This is some levity. It's the only Nintendo system I never owned. It's the GameCube.
The GameCube.
I even owned a Wii U. I owned a Wii U, and I did not own a GameCube.
Were you not working at the GameStop when the GameCube came out? Was that after you had left?
It was. No, I was. That was before I worked there.
Oh.
Wii was out.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
My brother had a GameCube. I didn't get one.
Did you live in the same house?
Yeah, I had an Xbox.
That counts. I'm counting it. That counts. Anything else to add on the topic?
VR boy.
A Virtual Boy? Did you have one of
Oh,
them?
I guess not. But I'm only counting consoles. So if we start getting into handheld, it's a fucking nightmare. Oh, excuse me.
You're allowed. I've already said
Okay,
bastard.
good.
Yeah, I don't
All
care.
right, cool.
All right. I
Um,
think this is probably a good place to roll on out. It's late for you.
it is
And I have to figure out what I'm going to eat for dinner. So thank you, everyone. Yes, I hope that this can be a model conversation for discussing things. I think that it's rather clear that Jax and I don't agree on this topic, or at the very least, we don't come from the same perspective. I think that on a lot of these areas, we can get to the same spot. But even if we're not at that same spot, um, we can still endeavor to understand each other and have the conversation, right? Um,
yeah.
so not that I'm out here going, you can't yell, don't yell at people. By all means, yell your heads off. I'm very much that guy too. Um, but I think that this particular a lot. I'll just stop there. I love this conversation. So thank you so much, Jax, for requesting it. Thank you for having it with me. Um, I'm really appreciative of your willingness to hear me out, even though I come from the is bad perspective, um, and so I'm very appreciative. So thank you.
Well, thank you for having me on to share my perspective. And I do think I get what you value about it, right? The autonomy and the conversation and valuing who you're playing with, right?
And I likewise understand your perspective of valuing the the minimizing distress, be it expected or unexpected. I understand your position on that for sure.
Yeah. Thank you. And it's nice. I mean, this you're right. This is I wish how conversations like these went more. Um, but I do appreciate the platform essentially to come on and talk about
Well,
it.
I'm happy to give it to you. You're part of the channel, so I'm very happy to come on and have this disagreement as um, gently as we've had it. But like I said, I think it's a good place to go. I am going to be watching Heath in a stream tonight. I'm not going to be on the stream, but Heath is doing. I think he's painting minis, and we're also going to do a watch party for the cultists. I don't know if anyone out there is interested, but come on by. It's going to be, I believe. I don't know if he's going to simulcast, but it's definitely going to be on the cultist YouTube channel, I believe. So come in and take a watch and watch him paint some things. We'll watch cultists and hang out and chat. And then I have a live stream tomorrow with Table Runner Crispy regarding co-creation. I have a couple of prepared questions for him that I'm very interested in getting answers to, but I think it's just going to be a conversation between the two of us to see, what is it? How is it implemented? Why is it important? Those sorts of things. So I do hope, and I don't disagree, right? There really shouldn't be any disagreement, as these are simply different play cultures, and each should permit the other to exist. I think that is a very even-handed, reasonable take. I still don't like safety tools, and I'm still going to get shit for that, but whatever. I'll take the shit. So, and I'm sure, Jax, you're still going to like them. Like, no one's mind was changed here.
No, I don't think either of us are walking away with a
Yeah, no,
opinion. I think this is it. This is just how we feel.
All right, guys.
Yeah.
Oh, and Brian mentioned civility and courtesy go a long way. I agree. So thank you all. I do appreciate your attendance. Thanks for watching. Thanks for hanging out, Brian. Hopefully we got to the topic a bit more quickly. But thank you all. Thank you, Jax, as always. And I'll see you all either in Heath stream or tomorrow or, further down the line when I publish some other stupid opinion that needs a disagreement stream. So take care, everyone, and I'll talk to you soon.